Hi, this is Carson Roberts. Today's broadcast is going to be about how nice it is to have a very large person as a close friend. Or, in other words, it's nice to have a large person as a friend when you're being bullied. So, this podcast is a lot about bullying and people who bully. The interesting thing about bullies is they always love to pick on somebody that's weaker than them or can't really defend themselves. Because when a bully has to go up against someone who is bigger than he or she is, well, guess what? They turn into chicken shit. They just don't want to go there. In fact, they run away. Now, a couple examples from my own life. When I was in high school, I went to Lower Merion High. And one of my best friends in Lower Merion was a guy named Mitchell McDaniel. And Mitchell McDaniel was a black man. He was probably in high school 6'9", maybe. He was just gigantic. Had hands, gigantic, huge hands. And Mitchell actually broke or held the Lower Merion High all-time scoring record until a guy probably you've all heard of, Kobe Bryant, came along, who also went to Lower Merion 30 years later and broke that record. Now, Mitchell and I were friends, and Mitchell was just such a nice guy, just so nice. Everybody loved Mitchell. And Mitchell couldn't be a nicer guy. But he was very, very dark-skinned. And he had these, pearl white teeth. And whenever he would smile, they would just kind of go from ear to ear. But it was a very strong contrast between his pearl white teeth and his very dark skin. And so whenever he would smile, it would really, really stand out. And so one night I'm at a party, back in the days when I drank a lot. And this was a party. It was kind of like at a mansion on the suburbs of Philadelphia. And there was a lot of ground around the mansion. There was a tennis court. And it was kind of late at night, so I was just walking around the grounds, and I had a beer in my hand. And I just leaned up against the tennis court fence. And there was only one light on in a tennis court, and it was very dimly lit. And I'm just standing against the fence, minding my own business, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes a bigger guy, a much bigger guy than me, from another school. And now back in those days, guys looked at other guys. I never did it, but, many guys would look at other guys just because they wanted to start trouble or start a fight. And they would look at other guys and say, "What are you looking at? You want to go at it? What are you looking at, man?" Even though you weren't even looking at them. And unfortunately, a lot of guys and bullies today, they use that same, they live in that same high school mentality, high school, I'll kick your ass mentality. But anyway, this bigger guy, he's got a leather jacket on, he just comes out of nowhere, and he says, "What are you doing, man?" I said, "Well, I'm just standing here finishing my beer." And he knocks the beer out of my hand and says, "Well, you just finished." And he said, "I think I'm going to kick your ass." And before I even had a chance to run or say anything, because he was much bigger than I was, he grabbed me with his left hand by the collar and kind of just shoved me more up against the fence. And I knew at that point I probably was just going to get smashed in the mouth, so I just kind of accepted it and was ready to get hit. And All of a sudden, out of nowhere, as the guy kind of pulls back his right hand or starts to pull it back, I mean, all of a sudden, out of nowhere. Now it's kind of pitch black there with this only dim light from the tennis court. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I just see these big, pearly white teeth appear. And as he steps in the light, I see it's Mitchell. And Mitchell simply looks at the guy and says, "Do we have a problem here?" And the guy, it was one of those priceless looks. The guy just looked at Mitchell and saw the enormous size of Mitchell. Now, this guy was a huge guy, but Mitchell was way bigger than he was. He just took one look at Mitchell and said, "No, I'm good. We're all good. No problem here." And the guy just kind of shriveled away into the darkness, and that was it. Mitchell shook my hand, and Mitchell and I just kind of walked off and started to have a conversation. So there was a perfect example. Thank God for Mitchell showing up when he did and being my friend. Kind of saved my ass, but there's a perfect example of a bully. When faced with somebody bigger than he is, he just, not so tough after all. Now, fast forward years later, here's another example. Fast forward years later, I'm going to UNLV, University of Nevada at Las Vegas. And to get some spending money, I worked the graveyard shift in a dormitory. And they had a little booth there that, people could get change for the vending machine, and if anybody wanted to. It was the summertime, and their policy then, I don't know if they still have it, during the summer, a lot of people would be traveling through Vegas and be hitchhiking around the country. And back in the days when you could actually hitchhike safely. And they would come into the dormitory, and the dorm had a special summer rate. I think it was like $5 or $10 a night or something if they wanted to stay there, because in the summer they had a lot of empty rooms. But it was cheap. So a lot of people that were traveling around the country, they would stay at the UNLV dorm, especially young kids. It was kind of like a hostel in the summertime. So I'm working the desk in the dormitory there. It's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's like right after school had gotten out. It was the beginning of summer, actually. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in the door. It's like 3 a.m. Nobody is in there at all in the lobby. It's just me. And this guy walks in. He is a mountain. I mean, just as big as a tree. And he had this gigantic beard and a big red plaid shirt on and suspenders. And he walks over to me, and I thought, oh my God, what's this guy going to do? Because he was huge. And anyway, he came up to me, extremely nice, big smile, came up to me, and he wanted to, stay there for the night. Turned out he was a logger in Alaska. And he had 6 months off, and he was just traveling around the country. And anyway, so he after he pays for his room and everything, we go sit on the couch, because he was a very interesting guy to talk to. He had traveled all over the country and all over the world, actually. So we just sat down on the couch and started having this conversation. Now, the dormitory also, there were some residents in there, and there were some baseball players and athletes that were still living in there. And the baseball team had just won, I don't know if they won the championship or the playoffs or something. They just won something. And all of a sudden, a couple of the baseball players come down the steps, and they're carrying this big trash can it was a huge trash can. And we had them attached to the walls on the different dormitory floors so people could throw their trash in. Anyway, they come down the steps, and obviously they had ripped this big trash can off the wall. So as they stepped down the stairs into the lobby, I said, "Excuse me, but you can't do that. That's a dormitory trash can. You can't just rip it off the wall," because they were ready to walk out the door with it. And I said, "Besides, where the hell are you going with it?" He said, "Oh, we're going over to Safeway." That was the name of the supermarket at the time, and it was open all night. "And we're going to fill it up with ice." And I said, "Well, I don't really care what you're going to fill it up with, but you can't rip it off the wall, and you can't take it out of the dormitory." And these guys were both drunk. And, of course, they went into their own, "Fuck you, asshole, we'll do what we want, da-da-da." And no sooner than that a few sentences came out of their mouth, I don't even think they noticed. I don't know if I said this, but this guy from Alaska, his nickname was actually Bear. And he actually looked like a bear. He was just a big, hairy guy with shoulder-length hair, gigantic beard. He probably had to be, 6'5", 6'6", and maybe 300 pounds, 350, something like that, but just pure beef and muscle. And I don't think they saw Bear even sitting there and noticed him. So when they started, throwing out to me their fuck yous and all that, Bear just simply stood up. And when he stood up, you noticed. And Bear just said with a big growl, "I don't think you really heard what the gentleman said. Didn't he just say, take the trash can and put it back upstairs? You can't really leave the dormitory with the trash can? I believe you should listen to what the gentleman just said." And with that, right on that note, these two guys just, without saying a word, just turned and took the trash can right back up the steps, and we never saw them at all for the rest of the night. So once again, how good it is to have somebody much bigger than you be by your side when stuff like that goes down, and just to prove again how much bullies turn into chicken shit pussies whenever they're faced with the real truth of somebody that's bigger than them or somebody that could actually kick their ass. They just seem to not be so tough. All right, well, that's my podcast for today. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next podcast. Thank you so much.